Today we're putting teams together.
We are putting teams together.
This is fun. Okay.
So a feature that and there's a lot, I'm going to do your best to kind of keep me on topic when it comes to not talking about stuff we just talked about.
Get like a spray bottle.
The spray bottle just missed his face.
No, Paul.
Okay, so they have the autofill feature. If you're brand new and you're just trying to get it, join a league and you don't really care, then go ahead and use the autofill feature. I've poked around with it. Eventually, I got to the point where I was getting a setup that I had kind of looked at before.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what do you think? Do you want to just kind of go through finishing setting up with an autofill and then go back and mess with it?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
Or do you want me to go, or should we go into some of the different drivers and how to manually click it?
Let's go manual.
Okay.
So in summary, you can autofill, and what's nice about that is it's going to distribute your $100 million, and so you're not going to have to, spend the time, worrying about, I don't have any good options left, and I only have $5.3 million left, and let me reconfigure that. It'll take the guesswork out of that for you, which is nice. But if you want to have a little more autonomy, be in the driver's seat, because racing.
There you Love it.
We're both dads. So
yeah,
that counts as funny.
You know when a joke becomes a dad joke?
When you become a dad, or
when it becomes apparent?
Wow,
I know, I love that. Okay, sorry. So here's what we'll do. Last year, if you've kept up with Formula One at all, you know about Red Bull, you know about Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
And last year, the dynamic duo was Max Verstappen, the constructor, Red Bull, and then some people would go with Ferrari, some people would go with McLaren. It would just kind of depend Mercedes for a little bit, but you would move in and out, because McLaren was so inexpensive at the beginning, then they started doing so well that eventually McLaren came in, and that's why they're ranked, like, that's why Lando Norris is like one of the top guys right now. So, but I want to demonstrate if we go for a full Red Bull setup. So we're going to do Max Verstappen, we're going to do Sergio Perez, and then we're going to go to constructors and click add the constructor. Now, if you look in this little upper left-hand corner, which is probably upper left-hand corner in the app as well, you're down to 21.3 million.
So again, if you're not looking at the screen here, Max is 30 million, Sergio is 20.8, and Red Bull Racing is 27.9.
Exactly.
So you've just spent 78 million of your dollars. Because math.
And and so Max Verstappen last year, he was in the low 20s at the start. Sergio Perez was 18-ish, and I don't know what Red Bull Racing was at, but you could get a whole Red Bull setup, and then you had to get, you'd have to slum it with a constructor like McLaren.
Right.
Last year, when McLaren was, a $10 million constructor or whatever, and Lando Norris was only $11 million, and then he comes up, and last year he put up almost as many points as Sergio Perez, and now suddenly he's one of the top-ranked drivers, and Lando Norris costs $23 million, and if you look, his option is shaded out. As soon as you can no longer afford a driver, that option gets shaded out.
So can you... Oh, I was wondering if you can do the autofill after making a few initial selections, but you cannot.
Oh no, you can't.
It's grayed out.
Grayed out.
So can you financially even fill the remaining spots? So one constructor and 3 remaining drivers with $21 million.
Let's try it.
Possible?
So let's go down to the bottom and get the lowest constructor. Sorry, I have to make sure. There we go.
And this year that is
Haas, who they fired their team principal because they finished last.
Oh, did they
F1.
really?
They did.
Okay.
Go Gunther. So I'm not sure what all the drama is behind that, but I know he's out as Haas team principal. Or at least he was last time I checked. Maybe, breaking news, he's not anymore, but I don't think that's true. Then we'll come down to the bottom 2 drivers capable of being gotten. My countryman Logan Sargent for 5.5, and then Kevin Magnussen for 6.2. And then, boom, you can't get Nico Hulkenberg, which is 6.4.
And you must have a full team.
You must have a full team. The only way you might be able to game the system is if somebody gets put out, if they get hurt. Because then what happens, but then I think you're still burning their cost. Because for example, when excuse me, I'm tired of saying the wrong names. When Daniel Ricciardo broke his hand.
Yeah.
They put a big red X through him, and they're like, you need to fill the spot. You need to sell him in quotes and then get somebody new to replace him. I don't think his value went to zero.
Oh,
he was
I see.
still being held that value.
So here's a what if. So Max Verstappen explodes for some reason. I mean, God forbid. That's
sure.
Yeah. So he's gone. Reserve driver steps in.
Yep.
For Max, is the reserve driver a $30 million driver in this system?
Negative. The reserve driver last year, because we had two reserve drivers. We had Liam Lawson and we had Daniel Ricciardo last year.
Yeah.
Both of them started out at like $4.5 or $5 million.
Okay.
Because they were the third drivers. That being said, or they were like even worse than third drivers. They weren't even on the team before. So yeah, so that driver will start out. So if in your example here, the car explodes and guess what, Max Verstappen isn't racing anymore, then you will go ahead. His value won't drop to zero. Then you will just be able to off-sell him and then get that $30 million and reinvest it into other people.
Okay, cool.
But I want to demonstrate to that end, as soon as you have Max Verstappen and as soon as you have Sergio Perez and stuff, like that really pretty much boxes out what you're able to do. So if we go through and we build it with like the second two level people, what really kills us, how about this, is the constructors. The constructors for the good teams are so important. And I'm sorry, they're so expensive that half, if you go for Ferrari and Mercedes, then there is 40% of your budget. And if you go for the number 2 and number 3 drivers, there goes 30% of your budget, right? Or for another 40%. So now you're down to 20 million.
For three remaining drivers.
For 3. And so it is possible to do it that way.
But at that point, at that level of performance, it's not how good of a performer are they, it's how much of a liability.
It's how much of a liability. In my view, it's how much of a liability are they? Because as soon as you have somebody like Lewis Hamilton, he puts up, 20 to 30 points a race.
Yeah.
Then after 3 on his 4th race, he gets a negative 20-point DNF. Well, fine. He still has, 40, 60, whatever points left.
Right.
But as soon as you have somebody like Pierre Gasly or an Esteban Ocon who maybe gets 7 to 10 points a race, 1 20-point DNF will put him back near nil.
Yep.
And if you're somebody like my countryman Logan Sargent, you get 12 DNFs over the course of a season, like punishable DNFs. Well, then there's no coming back from that.
Right. Yeah. When one of your drivers at the end of the season, it's a victory to break even. That's not what you want.
That's not what you're looking for, unless you can get them for cheap enough. Because I do have a philosophy that as soon as you could pay $6.4 million to basically zero out one of your driver slots, that would be probably the best case scenario for some of these. You spend 3 times 6 is 18, call it 20 million. Right now, we could get all 3 of these driver slots to be nothing. And then just have Lewis Hamilton, just have Sergio Perez and Ferrari and Mercedes.
Yeah,
that would probably be a better scenario than having a Logan Sargent and 2 Haas drivers on there.
Right.
Just because probably won't have time to go into the spreadsheets even today, but when I monologue on it later, when we talk about it later, a lot of these drivers, like they have, like the Ferraris, right? Carlos Sainz and Leclerc, they each had 1 had 3 and 1 had 4 DNFs throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, Leclerc had 4.
And so that's negative 80 points.
Yep.
But when you're putting up Ferrari numbers and you're putting up 400 or 500 points and those DNFs knock you down a rung, so now you're just putting up 200 or 300 for the course of a season, that's kind of baked into what you expect from a Ferrari or a Mercedes.
Sure. And I mean, it's going to be an inevitability.
Yeah.
I mean,
there
are too many variables for everything to go right all the time.
Sure. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good.
But as soon as you are and I'm not punishing them, I'm just saying, like, they're still great drivers, they still deserve to be there, but with the way the rules of the game are, there's such a heavy penalize for DNFs that as soon as you only put up 7 or 8 or 10 points a race, which would be great coming from, like, let's look at Nico Hülkenberg, right? As soon as Nico Hülkenberg for 6 million puts up 9 points every race, right? Well, a way you can do the math, and we can have a math lesson at some point, is how many points per race did you basically buy for your driver value?
Exactly.
And if for $6 million, we'll round it down to easy numbers, if for $6 million he gets 9 points, I'm no math magician, but that's 1.5 points per $1 million. Am I about right with that?
Oh, if it was
6-9?
If he was getting 11 points, that'd be
better, closer. Okay, but anyway,
I'm with you.
But so let's make it easy. Let's say for $6 million, he gets 6 points.
Yep.
Let's do it that way.
It's 1.0.
That's 1.0, and that's better than a lot of the drivers did last year. Like last year, the lower drivers were below like a 0.5. Like a lot of Max Verstappen had like 1.5, and the next to him was like a 1.2, but most of them had between 0.5 and 0.88 or whatever.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you can have a 1.0 PP points per million driver, like that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
That is fantastic. The problem is that one wreck negates all of those points as soon as you're only pulling in 6 points.
Sure.
Right. So maybe I've pounded that. I've hit the desk a lot about that topic. So that is what our mindset is going into this. Is how do we get the right amount of drivers to to balance the risk? What are we risking with all these drivers who are, so it used to be, if you listen to the previous podcast, I came up with my tier system, right? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Yeah.
Well, now if we look at this, if tier 1 is 20 million and above, well, 19.1, 19.1, 19, 18.8, 18.5. That's close enough to be, you can only get, because as soon as you get like in the 18.5 range, let's reset this, then you get Carlos Sainz, you get Charles Leclerc, and you get Ferrari. That's $43 million. Let's check and see. This will be a good litmus test, if that's the right word for me. Let's get the bottom constructor. Actually, I think you will be able to.
Yeah, no. So that's actually still a good amount to play with. That's not bad.
Yeah, then you have 18. That's actually not bad. So maybe that's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. But let's go ahead and, so that's Ferrari. Let's go ahead and reset to Mercedes.
And while he's doing this too, here's the thing. You know, if we reset perspective a little bit, you know, we're going to dig into the weeds and, you know, get very, very moneyball about it.
Yeah.
You know, I know, you know, you had a point that you were going to make about, you know, Lando Norris being assigned a value based on his late season performance, and how, you know, that value only makes sense if that's a sustainable performance through this season. But again, if you take a step back, you've got these lower value drivers who we know we've talked about not just being a positive, but being as minimal a liability as possible. Yeah. At the end of the day, this field of performance, these drivers are still so next level. I mean, this is 20 total people driving cars of this caliber, and so to be the difference between great and terrible is still so minuscule that any one of these drivers could have a breakout year.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at Max Verstappen 5 years ago when he was on Red Bull, back when Daniel Ricciardo was with them. Was it 6 years ago now? Probably 6 years ago.
Yeah, probably
now.
have to count. Yeah.
I mean, they were crashing into each other.
They were.
They'd both DNF. I mean,
yeah.
Who? I mean, I'm sure several people could have called his ascension to greatness, but. Yeah. He didn't have a great year.
No.
You know, so he's been around for a while, and then all of a sudden, the last couple of years, he's exploded.
Exactly.
So any one of these guys could just suddenly wake up.
Yeah.
And yes, there are different tiers of cars. Yes, there are design issues. Yes, there are, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th fastest paired to a certain driver, but it's you know, anything could happen this season, which is so exciting.
Anything could happen. It usually doesn't, but it can. But it can.
Yeah.
Like, look at your Lando Norris, right? Yeah.
Sure.
It was, well, he couldn't get, I mean, we looked through the stats earlier. Like, he was 17, 17, 17, and then 3rd place. But I just thought of something, and this could be a good rule of thumb for us to go through. So right now, if you have all of Mercedes, and we'll see if this proves a point I want to make. If you have all of Mercedes, then you can fill out with the most inexpensive drivers and constructors and still have $17 million to poke around with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay. So there's Mercedes. Now let's go with there's Mercedes. Now let's go with McLaren, and then we'll go ahead and get Haas as well. Go for the 2 McLaren drivers, and then just get the
best you can afford.
The best you can afford. All you can afford.
$28 million. Yeah.
And then there's the $10 million. Now, and here's my thesis statement for this going forward. This is why I called it like basically a rule change. I misspoke earlier in the previous episode and called it a rule change, because now let's go ahead. So that's McLaren. That is the second best constructor as per value for dollar value. Now let's go to Red Bull, and I think I already did it, but I'm going to do it again. Then come back up to drivers. We're going to get the 2 Red Bull drivers and then try and field a team of what's best, and we can't. So my thesis statement is the price value for Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez specifically, Max Verstappen specifically, and for the Red Bull constructor, I have to look and see what their value was before. The money around this was based that you cannot field a team with all Red Bull. That is what they prohibited without saying it, without writing it in the rule book. We do not have enough money in the roster at the start of the season to go full Red Bull and nobody else. We have to say negative to Sergio Perez, and then we can add 2 more drivers with 11 million left.
Well, between episodes and off camera, we were looking at point totals for last year. Mm-hmm. And, you were saying to be a top fantasy performer, if you didn't have both Max and Red Bull,
yeah,
you're not going to be in that tier.
Exactly.
The true performance level came in once you already have Max and once you already have Red Bull, and then it's how you've managed your remaining constructor and your remaining drivers.
Correct.
It was just kind of an asterisk that anyone else need not apply here.
Yep.
So,
and then towards the end of the season, it was you had to have Max, you had to have Red Bull, and you had to have Lando Norris.
Okay.
He was being so dominant early on in the season. It was you had to have, I'm brain farting on the names. Fernando Alonso.
Yeah.
To ride that wave, and then as Fernando Alonso stopped being so dominant,
to switch him out
for Lando Norris. And so that was your, in quotes, value driver that was only worth $10 million.
Yeah.
That was bringing you in huge return on investment. So for the purpose of this podcast, this episode, since last year, since I am so walking into the season so for Red Bull, I truly believe that Red Bull is so dominant that you can't win without them. You have to have Max Verstappen. You have to have Red Bull as a constructor. What else can you field? The big question I came into this season with was, what else can I field with those? Everything else we can toy it around. Like I have ideas for having a all Mercedes and Ferrari build, right? Because those guys are like they're worth being there. They just didn't perform to the level they should have last year, right?
Yeah.
So with that, my go-to is, first off, do not take Logan Sargent.
Yeah.
Do not. He had negative fantasy points next year. I am hot watching him. As soon as this guy is picking up any points and he can stay in the positive, then absolutely get him on your team. He had like 12 DNFs last season. It was just not good. I had him on the reason why I firmly believe I wasn't in the hires is because I had him on my team last year for the first 3 races.
Oh,
because
no.
I believe he was my countryman, man. Of course,
sure.
I believed it. And then I was like, no, I need to actually play to win.
Yeah.
So I'm watching you, Logan. Go ahead and do good things, and we'll get going. But so Daniel Ricciardo, I strongly encourage everybody to get Daniel Ricciardo, and that's the only really true recommendation aside from Max Verstappen and Red Bull should repeat.
Okay, I know we're not going to get into the weeds too
Yeah.
much, but give me that one stat poll that you caught that's giving you so much faith in Daniel Ricciardo.
So the reason why I have so much faith in Daniel Ricciardo is, besides all of his history and the fact that he has a long time in the sport, and you can counter that with saying, well, he got weeded out of the sport, then he's trying to come back in, is the fact that the Fantasy Formula One algorithms mismathed his points per million for the 2023 season.
So he was in only a total of how many races for the year?
So he was in a total of 7 races
Okay.
that I counted. But there was 22 races in the season.
Yep.
So as soon as they would go and take the points and I have to remember what the exact calculation is, but as soon as they took the number, divided it by how many races were in the season, that gives you how many points average you got per race.
Yep.
they divided him by the same 22 that they divided everybody else by.
Right. And so when you divide by 22, I think it came down to only like 0.4.
It was
points
0.4 exactly, and that was what they had for that. He had a 0.4 points per million.
Right, but based on his actual performance before he broke his hand,
it was like
if you divide by 7 instead,
exactly, it's like 1 point. He has like 3M7 is 21, so you get basically 3 times more than that. It's like 1.27.
So his
points per million.
So his end of season value was calculated based on that divide by 22.
Correct.
Which is why at $9 million he's a bargain.
He is a huge bargain.
Okay.
And he's driving with the same team. So and I forget what we decided there before. There was RB Racing.
Wasn't that Alfa Romeo?
Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri was one of them.
I think AlphaTauri still exists.
Does it?
I believe.
Let me look at the constructors.
Yeah.
I need to do better at remembering. It says RB Alpine.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Is it Alpha?
No, wait a second.
So one of them became
one's Kick Sauber,
and the other became that. I want to say it was
Was Audi Racing was a thing last year, right?
AlphaTauri, I think.
Because then it reverted.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, sorry about that. We'll get their teams, but basically, he's with the same people in the same car that he drove last year, same team, same evolution, and I think he is going to be like a shining star this year if he keeps it out of the wall. I project him to be the same ascension in points and value that Lando Norris was last year.
Oh, wow.
I think it's going to be that thing. I think that he is going to do great. I think that he is viewing this as my guess would be, because he bounced around, right? He went from Red Bull. He was second driver for Red Bull, went to Renault, went to McLaren,
yeah.
and that was where, and maybe there's one other driver in there. But every time, if you watch the Drive to Survive, they did a really good job of documenting it.
Sure.
That he was trying to find that place to be the first driver. He wanted to be that guy who could win and have somebody else block for him.
Yeah.
But every time he moved to a new team, it just didn't work out that way. And so eventually he lost his seat, went back to Red Bull as a third driver. I noticed, even from his social media and from what I saw of him, he's using his people skills more. He seems to be a lot more genuinely grateful to be there. Kind of like in the military when somebody goes to non-judicial punishment and then they come back and they have a whole new personality now that they've been so close to the edge. He knows. My guess is, I've never talked to him. I don't know him personally. But if I was in his shoes, I would be, once I get a taste of the outside, and you're like, wow.
Oh, this can all be taken away real quick.
From me real quick. I better enjoy it. And Red Bull's like, all right, do you want to come back in? You can still be in the show.
Yeah.
But if somebody breaks their arm, then you're in. Okay, he went. And then as soon as Nick DeVries and the little RB team was out, they put in Daniel Ricciardo. And then, of course, he broke his hand. Liam Lawson came in, all that. But he did well. So I think now that he's back in the show, he's not going to ding up the car. I think he's going to be aggressive, but not too aggressive. I think he's going to look out for the car. I think he's going to be a good, solid, stable driver that lets that team put money into the car to evolve it.
And then after that redemption arc, he burns bridges and goes to another team.
Bridges and go to another team, or they sell him, they trade him like a card, or they have him back on Red Bull Actual. Like they could go any way with him. But I think he's like the very confident person I have.
Nice.
So, and then we're trying to keep this down in the next couple minutes. So, then who else do you have? Well, let me take my notes because I looked at it before.
While you're checking that, one more small rabbit trail here. You were talking about a potential cloud over Red Bull.
Yes.
Let's address that real quick.
We will address it real quick. I'm not trying not to get into too much drama. I don't know too much about what it's about, but I know there are some legal allegations around Red Bull's team principal.
Oh, I was talking about design elements.
Oh, design elements. Gotcha. Cool. I can talk a little bit more about that. So, and we just don't know the way the team principal goes.
Yeah.
So goes the team, like the commanding officer of a unit.
Yep.
So that could be a thing in the future, but he's still in the seat, so it's fine. About the development. So early in the 2023 season, Max Verstappen was 30 seconds to a minute ahead of everybody else, like at the end of the races. He was just, if he got out in front, he was just gone. Well, that lead shrank to maybe 10 seconds by the end of the last race, by Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And it was Abu Dhabi or Vegas. But the talking heads said that if Lewis Hamilton had just a few more laps, because of the way the tires were degraded and all of this, if there had been just a couple more laps on the ticker, Lewis Hamilton could have just on merit beaten Max Verstappen in that race.
Oh, wow.
Now, that being said, there's a lot that goes into it, and there wasn't more laps on it. But I say all that to say that everybody was taking notes on Red Bull's car
Sure.
all season. And you saw it as all the upgrades started coming at the halfway mark and at the 3/4 mark and stuff like that. Now, as soon as you look at all the cars were released and everyone's talking about it, if you look at the cars, they're all showing remarkable resemblance to the RB19.
Yeah.
Well, RB19 is done, a thing of the past. Now Red Bull has their RB20, and they stole some, if I read my articles correctly, previously abandoned design ideas from Mercedes.
Oh, interesting.
And made them a little bit more so. So now it looks like everyone else is doing what Red Bull did last year, and
Right.
Red Bull's gone on to the new thing.
So the risk is they're moving away from the if it ain't broke,
Yeah,
don't fix it
exactly.
model. Maybe to the next big thing.
Could be,
But-
they're there for.
But what if, oh no, we've made a serious error.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that all that ascendancy is gone that was built up in the last couple of years.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
To put it in, and it was like with if put like in football or soccer or whatever, some new training regimen comes out. Some person once in a generation hits their power band and just does great things, and then people try and figure out how to imitate that.
Yep.
And eventually it will go bust. Eventually they will either go to something new that doesn't work, or everybody else will just catch up with them.
Gotcha.
And I'm mixing my sports metaphors, but real quick, Ronda Rousey, MMA,
Yeah.
right? She was dominant. She could keep range when she was fighting you, and she'd get you into a grapple, and then she submits you. And I remember once I went to a bar and waited around for 5 hours to watch the pay-per-view, and the round lasted like 10 seconds. Or as soon as you went stand-up, she just knocked you out.
Yeah.
Right? Well, what did they do? And to me, this was something that UFC, again, private organization, they can do what they want. They brought in a Golden Gloves kickboxing champion with long arms.
Holly Holm.
Holm.
Yep.
And
Striker.
just knocked, Ronda couldn't get close, just knocked her out.
Yep.
Ronda came back for a rematch, got knocked out again, had to get her jaw wired. And then she retired from fighting. Now she's happily married with husband and kid. And then Holly Holmes
also whole wrestling career after that.
Oh, did she have a whole wrestling career after UFC?
Oh yeah, she went full like WWE.
Oh,
Yeah.
sweet.
Whole life there too.
Okay, cool. I didn't know about that. Sweet. Well, good for her. But then Holly Holmes stayed in UFC, and she continued to do good things.
Did she?
I thought she did. I didn't really keep up.
I don't know too much. Yeah.
In my head, it was female UFC at the weight class she was stagnant, and no one wanted to fight her, and
Right.
no one was wanting to cover it. So they found the one thing that could counter her, gave her 3 fights, gave her a title fight, and they put Ronda out of the sport.
Wow.
And then she went on to the next thing, and finally everyone kind of kept going.
Sure.
So people love rooting against Red Bull. I'm rooting for them still, just because I was fans of them back when they were just a sports drink company and the two drivers were bouncing into each other.
Oh sure.
But now that they've gone on to the next thing because everybody else was figuring out what they'd done,
Have they found their Holly Holm?
have they found their Holly Holm?
Right.
Or are they going on to the next thing, and now they're going to be even more dominant than they were last year?
Right.
But there is a future here where Max Verstappen qualifies 10th, finishes 5th, and isn't worth half of what he did. But also, you don't bet against Max Verstappen for the last 3 years.
Exactly.
So we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah,
But
that's a very big what if scenario.
Very big what if.
To pad the time a little bit. Here we are.
My primary thing, and I will give you, just so no one walks away empty-handed, my primary thought right now for the best team that I can come up with is Yuki Tsunoda, because I know I've said some questionable things about the points he's putting up, but he is on the same team. They do have new money coming in, or maybe there's a new brand, I don't know. And then Pierre Gasly, where is he? Right there. And then Zhou Yu. And then the bummer is that leaves $4.4 million on the table. So I'm not a huge fan of that. So if we get rid of the cheapest person, and this is a good way to go for it, if you get rid of the cheapest person, we'll then see how high up you can go, and we can get Lance Stroll. But Lance Stroll wasn't all that impressive for me last season. And I'm going to avoid looking at the sheet. But as soon as you don't go Lance Stroll, oh wait, hon, I forgot about my. There you go. That's where I was like, what did I do wrong? Get the Red Bull constructor, baby Red Bull constructor. That's it.
And there's your extra money.
There's my extra money. I wonder where that went. Yeah, then you go back to Jogan Yu. There we go.
That's better.
$2 million. That looks a lot better. And so the reason why I am looking at this build right now, I'm not saying this is what it's going to be.
Sure.
Is that it's Red Bull heavy. And Red Bull was so dominant that you're having the most dominant driver in a generation, his constructor that's been leading the pack for 3 years, their baby team, right? Their team that they're no longer even pretending isn't in the same field as them. You have Daniel Ricciardo, who has a long history and came off the bench to be one of the best points per million driver value in all of last year. And then was Jogan Yu, Yuki Tsunoda, and Pierre Gasly. You just have like their Yuki Tsunoda. I remember his points per million last year. Even DNF's all into it was like 0.8.
That's not bad.
No, so these guys were like 0.8, 0.6s. They could have done a lot better if they kept it out.
And that's the problem. We talk so much about Max Verstappen at 1.5. No one else. No 1.5.
Yeah, no one else. Yeah. So and with and that's the last thing I'll say before we shut it down. Looking at the clock, is that Sergio Perez came in second last year.
Yeah.
He's a great driver, but if you listen to all the talking heads, myself included, they're like, well, he's just not as good as his teammate. Well, is he going to stay with him next year? Yeah, he is. He's the second best driver in the world, man. Like, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
There's no other place, unless he went somewhere that was going to give him a less good car. Like, what's he going to do, go to Mercedes? No, then he'd behind somebody. I mean, unless he goes to Ferrari, and they're like, no. So I think he's staying there, and this is the loadout that I can see for a team right now. But then you still have two other ones, right?
Yeah.
So
Can I walk you through my team here real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll reset this and I'll put yours up.
Gotcha. Okay,
so
constructors. I'm doing this. I don't like the idea of hanging up all my money on just the high value stuff. So
sure.
I do want an element of Red Bull because I'm not a complete moron. So I'm going Red Bull constructor.
Okay.
And then I'm going middle of the road constructor because also of the racers that they have, or the drivers that they have on their team. So I'm going Aston Martin for my other constructor.
And so Aston Martin, they had a great start. They're the exact inverse of what McLaren was. They had a great start, and then they just went back to being, not as good.
Gotcha.
But then McLaren came up. So yeah, I can totally get behind Aston Martin.
Okay, and then my higher dollar racer, I'm going Charles Leclerc from Ferrari.
Okay.
I'm going Fernando Alonso as well.
Yep.
And again,
former world champion.
Totally non-scientific method here. I'm going like the pre-Moneyball scouts where Brad Pitt's getting pissed off at all of them because he's just like, yeah, I mean, he's a good player, but his girlfriend's kind of
exactly. Does he have a good swing? The ball explodes.
Yeah, this is totally that line of thinking. He's again former world champion. He's 42, 43 years old. He's got a little left in the tank. He's still hanging around.
Sure.
And I don't think it's a Daniel Ricciardo. I just want to stay in the show. I think he wants to he wants to prove something on his way out.
And if you give him a car fast enough, he absolutely will.
So I like that energy.
I can get behind that
too.
for sure.
Who else do I got? I got I'm taking Daniel Ricciardo because I'm learning from you and your statistical ways. I'm going Nico Hulkenberg.
Okay.
Again, voice of experience. Also, I'm starting to run out of money. So, and then last, I don't know much about him. I know he was an up and comer once, but it's been a minute since he's moved or shaken, and very much so Pierre Gasly, and that puts me at $0.4 million left.
Perfect. So, I think that's really good. Like, and we can dive into different team loadouts and stuff like that. I'm behind that. If you're not going to have Max Verstappen on your team, Charles Leclerc, he deserves to be there. He's a lead driver. Fernando Alonso has done great things. You already know what I think about Daniel Ricciardo. Nico Hulkenberg. Yeah, when Haas is one of those teams that when they don't DNF.
The standard is so low that pretty much anything's going to be a win.
Yeah, yeah. And Pierre Gasly, he's one of those guys that either does great or crashes. So,
okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
so maybe I'll need to rethink that one.
But he's also, when he does great, he does really great.
Yeah.
And if all he has to do is not crash this year as much, and then they do so much better. So no, I can get behind that.
Cool.
For sure. All right. Well, we will go ahead and call it there, and then you and I can talk offline about what we're going to do for the next, because I think we have a lot more before the kickoff of the season, at least, we can probably get a lot more conversation going about what to, because we have 3 teams to outfit.
Oh, that's true.
So we can have 3 different strategies.
And as of record, we still got 9 days here.
That's
so.
true.
All right.
That's true. All right, cool. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Take
Cheers.
care, everybody.